On the edge of the American frontier, where dust devils danced and justice came, at the end of a rifle, a dying man crawled to a stranger's well and changed everything. Tobias Hartwell had spent years surviving the silence of the plains, never expecting salvation to come wrapped in blood and feathers. But when a wounded Apache collapsed on his land, begging for water, Tobias faced a choice that would unravel everything he thought he knew. Was he just a settler with a gun or something more? As lawmen with dark secrets closed in, as old ghosts stirred in the dirt, one man's act of mercy would ignite a reckoning that crossed tribal lines, shattered lies, and threatened the fragile peace of a nation. This isn't a tale of heroes or villains. It's a story about the moment everything changes, the moment a man chooses not to hate. And it all started with a bucket of water. If you found this story meaningful and inspiring, don't wait. Hit like right now to give the channel more motivation. Share this video to spread the message to more people, and subscribe with the notification bell so you won't miss the next incredible stories. The blood trail led straight to his water well. Tobias Hartwell had lived 37 years on this dry, wind-beaten patch of land. And if there was one thing the frontier had taught him, it was how to read blood. He knew the coppery scent, the sticky look of it under sun, the difference between a deer gut shot on a hunt and something that didn't belong in these parts. But he wasn't prepared for what he found when he followed the crimson trail past the barn, wasn't prepared for the moment. Everything in his world tilted quietly and irrevocably. Slumped against the cool stone wall of the well was a young Indian warrior, his body broken and twisted like a fallen bird. One hand pressed tightly to the raw, gaping wound in his side, while the other stretched upward, just barely reaching for the bucket that hung 3 feet above his head, so close and yet impossibly far. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each one a struggle, each one defiant. But his eyes, God, those eyes, they weren't dull like a man waiting to die. They were alert, watching, measuring, expecting the worst, and maybe that was fair. In 1847, this land didn't forgive mercy. An Indian on your land meant trouble, the kind of trouble that ended in fire and scalps and blood on your doorstep. Every neighbor within 50 miles would have told Tobias the same thing: put a bullet in the savage's skull and bury him deep. No questions, no hesitation. That's how you stayed alive out here. That's how you kept your name out of the obituaries sent back east. And yet Tobias couldn't move. His rifle hung frozen in his hands, his finger resting just shy of the trigger. This was the smart thing, the safe thing, the expected thing. But as the desert wind caught the dying man's hair and the light shifted across his face, Tobias saw something he hadn't expected, something painfully human. There wasn't just fear in the Indian's gaze. There was thirst, the kind Tobias knew too well, the kind he'd felt during the drought of '44 when 3 days without water had turned his own body into a whisper of itself. That hollow ache, the unbearable tightness in the throat, the dizziness that felt like death itself whispering your name. He'd seen that look in dying animals, in men too, but never in someone his people had taught him to see as enemy. Water, the Indian whispered. The word was little more than breath, cracked and broken, but unmistakable. A plea, not a command. A last tether to hope. Tobias lowered his rifle. He didn't know why not, really. Maybe it was the look in the young man's eyes. Maybe it was the way the frontier had hollowed him out over the years, left him full of silence and longing. Days blurred into each other out here. Conversations where few trust even rarer. Tobias spent more time talking to fence posts and cattle than to human beings. Maybe deep down he wasn't afraid of the Indian lying by the well. Maybe what he feared more was that this meaningless solitary cycle of survival was all his life would ever be. He reached for the bucket. His neighbors would call him a fool. His brother back east would say he'd lost his mind to loneliness and desert winds. And maybe he had. Maybe years of heat and isolation had stripped away the layers of practicality and left only something raw and searching underneath. He knelt beside the stranger, dipped the bucket, and brought the water to trembling lips. The Indian drank like a man drowning in sand. One bucket, then another, then a third. The thirst in him was ravenous, desperate, as though he were trying to reclaim his life in gulps. Tobias sat by him in silence, watching, feeling the absurd weight of what he'd done settling over him like dust on a coffin. This was madness. A white man giving water to a wounded Indian was as good as carving a target into his own chest. But as the warrior's breathing steadied and his shaking hands found strength enough to hold the bucket, something shifted in the air around them, some unseen thread weaving them together, not as enemies, not as white and red, but simply as men. That was when Tobias saw the blood again. Not just what had soaked into the dirt, but the wound itself. A bullet hole clean and round. Not the work of an animal, not an accident. It was fresh, still bleeding, and surrounded by the scorched marks of close-range powder. Someone had shot this man up close, intentionally, and recently, which meant someone might be tracking him. Right now, following the same trail of blood Tobias had just walked. Maybe watching from the ridge, maybe only minutes away. The Indian seemed to know it too. His breath hitched, and with great effort he raised a hand and pointed to the horizon. Then he drew his thumb slowly across his throat. A warning. Danger was coming. Tobias's heart pounded like a war drum. He looked around the dusty expanse of his ranch, suddenly aware of every vulnerability. The open fields, the worn-down barn, the unlatched gate swinging in the... If you like this video, please comment 1. If you don't like, comment 0 or express your opinion about this video. The Indian drank 3 full buckets before his trembling hands could finally hold the rim steady. Each gulp echoed through the silence like a prayer, like a desperate grasp for life itself. Tobias Hartwell crouched beside him, stunned not just by how close the man had come to death, but by what he had just done. He had offered water to someone his neighbors would have called a savage. To someone who, according to every rule of frontier survival, should have been left to die, or worse. His hands, rough from years of mending fences and breaking horses, still gripped the bucket's wooden handle. But it was his mind that refused to let go. What had he just done? In this land, mercy wasn't a virtue. It was a liability. The stranger leaned back against the stone well, color slowly returning to his skin. But Tobias noticed something then, something that made his stomach twist into knots. The wound wasn't just deep. It wasn't an accident. Powder burns darkened the skin around the torn flesh. Tobias had seen enough close-range shooting wounds to recognize the truth. This man had been ambushed, shot deliberately, at near point blank. And if he had been shot nearby, that meant one terrifying thing. Whoever did it might still be looking for him, right now. As if on cue, the warrior's eyes darted toward the horizon. Then, with a trembling arm, he raised his hand and sliced it slowly across his own throat. The message couldn't have been clearer. Danger. Coming. Soon. And that's when Tobias heard it, the faint but unmistakable rhythm of approaching hoofbeats. Not one, not two, but many. Horses, fast, riders, closing in, his breath caught in his throat. Tobias scrambled to his feet, mind racing. He couldn't move the man, not in time. The barn, the cellar, the root cellar behind the barn, maybe. But the Indian wounded as he was suddenly reached out and grabbed Tobias's wrist with shocking strength. He shook his head slowly, deliberately. And then he smiled. Not the kind of smile Tobias expected. Not gratitude, not fear. Something else. Recognition. The hoofbeats grew louder. Then they appeared, 6 riders cresting the ridge like a dust storm, rifles glinting in the sun. Tobias's heart sank as he recognized the lead rider, Marshall Dixon Webb, a man whose reputation for cruelty and violence stretched from Santa Fe to the Rio Grande. The kind of lawman who didn't ask questions, the kind who shot Indians first, then claimed their corpses were justice. Webb dismounted with that slow, confident swagger of someone who'd never lost a fight. He scanned the area with sharp, pale eyes. "Afternoon, Hartwell," he said, voice smooth as snake oil. "We're tracking a wounded Indian. Blood trail leads right to your well." Tobias forced himself to remain calm. "Ain't seen any Indians today, Marshal. Been working the south fence." Webb's gaze drifted to the dark patches of blood near the well. His lip curled slightly. "That's so." He stepped closer. Tobias could feel the Indian's presence behind him, still silent, waiting. One wrong move, one breath too loud, and they were both dead. "You know the penalty for harboring an Indian fugitive?" Webb asked, his voice a casual threat. "Same as treason. Hanging. No trial." Tobias felt the weight of every lie he'd ever told pressing down on him. He opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, the Indian behind him spoke. Not in English, but in a rich musical cadence that rolled like thunder across the plains. Webb froze. His entire body stiffened. Then something remarkable happened. The blood drained from his face. His eyes widened with something Tobias never expected to see in a man like Webb: fear. He whispered, "Dear God, it's him." The other riders dismounted in silence, faces pale, weapons forgotten. One by one, they recognized the name, whispered between them like a warning. Ayanna. Tobias turned back to the warrior, stunned. Webb looked at him like a man who had just woken up to find the world upside down. "Do you know who you've been helping?" he said, voice shaky. "That's Ayanna, son of Chief Tuckakota of the Northern Apache. He's the one who brokered the peace treaty with Fort Richardson." Tobias's world shifted on its axis. This wasn't some renegade hiding in desperation. This was the man who had stopped 3 years of bloody war. The man who had made it possible for Tobias and men like him to sleep through the night without fear of raids. The one who had built a fragile bridge between two worlds. And Tobias had nearly let him die. Shame washed over him, hot and suffocating. He had pointed a rifle at this man, had hovered over the trigger ready to kill someone who had fought for peace, someone who had been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect him. "I was on my way to meet with Colonel Morrison," Ayanna said. Now switching to perfect English, his voice calm but weary, "to expand the treaty. But Morrison never meant to negotiate. He meant to silence me. Forever." Webb's jaw clenched. "Morrison's dead," he muttered. "Shot 3 days ago. You're wanted for his murder." "Because that's what they want you to believe," Ayanna replied, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "He was killed by men wearing war paint, pretending to be Apache. But they weren't." He looked directly at Webb. "They were your men." The silence that followed was thick with the weight of truth. Tobias stood motionless, the shame coiling in his chest like a snake. He'd lived so long with assumptions, fears passed down like heirlooms. Indians were enemies, savages, killers. But Ayanna's eyes held more honor than he'd seen in most men born in churches. In that moment, Tobias Hartwell's conscience stirred. Something long buried came to life. He realized that the man behind him had risked his life for peace, and the people sent to protect it had tried to destroy it. Destroy him. And Tobias had almost helped them do it. If you found this story meaningful and inspiring, don't wait, hit like right now to give the channel more motivation. Share this video to spread the message to more people. and subscribe with the notification bell so you won't miss the next incredible story. Tobias heard the hoofbeats before he saw them. Sharp, fast, purposeful. Riders, 6 of them, and they were coming straight for his ranch. The wounded Apache Ayana heard it too. His eyes snapped open wide with urgency and unmistakable fear. With a pained breath, he tried to push himself upright against the stone well blood blooming through the bandage Tobias had just wrapped. The desperation in his face wasn't just fear of death. It was fear of who was coming. Tobias's body moved on instinct. He grabbed a bucket of water and began splashing it over the blood trail leading to the well, trying in vain to erase the evidence. But it was too late. The dust cloud on the ridge had crested, and the riders thundered into view, rifles glinting in the dying light, horses snorting, and at the lead, a man Tobias recognized instantly. Marshal Dixon Webb. If the West had a devil, Webb was wearing his boots. Known for dispensing justice from the barrel of a gun, Webb was the law in these parts, and law out here wasn't blind. It aimed where it pleased. Tobias stepped in front of the well, heart pounding, doing his best to look like a man fixing a fence post. Normal, innocent. Dry-mouthed and trembling, but innocent. Webb pulled up 10 feet away, his blue eyes cold and surgical. "Evening, Hartwell," he said with that slow, poisonous drawl. "We're tracking a wounded Indian. Blood trail leads right to your well." Tobias forced his face into neutrality. "Ain't seen any Indians, Marshal. Been working on the south fence most of the day." Webb scanned the property. His eyes lingered on the damp patches of dirt near the well, and Tobias could see the doubt flicker behind them. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, as if giving the noose time to tighten. "That's so," he murmured. "Funny thing. That sure looks like blood to me." Behind Tobias, Ayana stayed deathly still. The silence was unbearable. "You know what harboring a fugitive gets you out here, don't you?" Webb continued. "Same as treason. Rope around the neck. No trial, just dust and regret." Tobias had always believed in the law, in justice. His father had raised him on those values like they were gospel. But standing there between a wounded peacemaker and a marshal ready to kill him without hesitation, Tobias felt a deep, sickening twist in his gut. This wasn't justice. This was murder with paperwork, and it broke something inside him. Then, without warning, Ayana spoke not in English, but in his native tongue. The words rolled through the evening like a forgotten melody. Strong, clear, undeniable. Webb froze. His boot halted mid-step. The other riders dismounted in silence. One of them, Bradley, the youngest, stared with growing confusion. Webb's face went pale. "Dear God," he whispered. "You're him." Tobias turned in disbelief. Webb's voice shook. "That's Ayana, son of Chief Takakota, the one who negotiated the Fort Richardson peace treaty." Tobias felt the ground shift beneath his boots. The man he'd almost let die beside his well wasn't just a warrior. He was the warrior. The only reason there hadn't been war for the past year. The man whose signature had stopped the burning of settlements. The man who had brought hope to both sides. And Tobias, who thought himself decent, had hesitated to save him, had raised a rifle to him. The shame came in like a flood, a hot, suffocating current of realization. He'd believed deep down that the law would always be on the side of what was right. But if that were true, why did Webb look ready to kill a man who'd brought peace? Ayana spoke again now, in perfect English, his voice thin but firm. "There was an ambush," he said. 3 days ago. I was meeting Colonel Morrison to expand the treaty south, but Morrison had other plans, or someone did. They set us up. He was killed. I was shot. They made it look like an Indian raid." Webb's face twitched. "You're wanted for Morrison's murder," he growled. because that's what they want people to believe, Ayanna said. But Morrison wasn't killed by Apache. He was killed by men pretending to be Apache, wearing paint, speaking a few words. Enough to fool witnesses, enough to frame me. The words struck like a hammer. Tobias stared at Webb, waiting for denial, waiting for justice. But Webb's hand crept toward his holster. "You're talking treason," he said. "Corruption." "I'm talking truth," Ayanna replied. "And that's what scares you." Something cracked in the circle of riders. Deputy Bradley took a step forward, uncertain but brave. "Marshal," he said quietly, "remember the rifle shipment that went missing last spring? They said Indians stole it. But I saw those rifles in the hands of settlers headed south. Same serial numbers, same crates." "Shut up," Bradley Webb snapped. But the others were listening now. Doubt flickered like firelight across their faces. For the first time in his life, Tobias realized law and justice weren't always the same. Sometimes they stood on opposite sides of the well. And sometimes a man had to choose between what he was told and what he knew was right. All his life, Tobias had believed in good men wearing badges. But today, the man with the badge was the villain. And the so-called enemy, the dying Indian he'd nearly left to rot, was the only man in the yard speaking truth. Tobias swallowed hard, the taste of iron rising in his mouth. His rifle still hung loosely in his hands, and he was done standing with the wrong side. If you like this video, please comment 1. If you don't like, comment 0, or express your opinion about this video. Tobias Hartwell had seen a lot of strange things in his 12 years on the frontier. Cattle struck by lightning, dust devils tearing through crops, men dying with curses on their lips. But nothing. Nothing prepared him for what was happening now. 6 armed men were standing in a circle on his ranch yard, rifles drawn, aimed not at outlaws or raiders, but at each other. Marshal Dixon Webb, who just moments ago had carried himself like a god of law, was now trembling pale, pistol pointed at Tobias himself. And behind him, barely standing, was Ayanna, an Apache warrior Tobias had nearly left for dead, who now held the attention of everyone like a prophet delivering judgment. And then Ayanna began to sing. Not in English, not in any tongue Tobias understood. But the sound was something else entirely. It was low at first, almost a whisper, but it carried like wind through canyon walls, haunting, melodic, ancient. It was a language older than the fences Tobias had built, older than the blood-soaked borders of the territory. The kind of song that felt carved from the bones of the land itself. The effect was immediate. Even the deputies, nervous, angry, twitching with adrenaline, began to lower their weapons slightly. Their breathing slowed. Their eyes softened. The melody wrapped around them like a fog. Even Webb, stubborn and venomous, seemed caught in its spell. Tobias stood frozen, rifle forgotten in his hands, listening. But Ayanna wasn't just singing. He was calling. Somewhere deep inside Tobias, beneath the years of suspicion, the loneliness, the warnings whispered by old men around whiskey-soaked campfires, something cracked. He felt it like a shiver down his spine. And then came the answer. Hoofbeats. Many, fast, unmistakable. Tobias turned toward the horizon, and his breath caught in his throat. They were coming. Not 6, not a dozen. 50 Apache warriors thundered over the ridge in perfect formation. Sunlight catching on their war paint and eagle feathers. The ground vibrated beneath them like thunder rolling through the bones of the earth. Tobias's first instinct was fear. His father would have called this the end. His neighbors would have screamed massacre. But this wasn't a war party. It was a procession. At their head rode a man who carried himself with the stillness of a mountain, Chief Takakota. His gray braids shimmered in the sunset, his eyes sharp as obsidian, his presence so commanding that, even from 50 yards away, Tobias felt the urge to lower his head. He did. Not out of fear, but reverence. The warriors fanned out, forming a wide circle around the ranch, not in threat, but in solemn protection. No weapons were drawn, no war cries were shouted. Just silence. The kind that filled churches and burial grounds. Sacred silence. Chief Takakota dismounted slowly. He walked toward the well, toward Ayanna, toward Tobias, with every step measured, dignified. His eyes never left his son. Tobias felt a lump rise in his throat as the old man knelt beside Ayanna, cradling his head, speaking words. Tobias couldn't understand, but felt deep in his bones. Words of a father, not a general. Of grief and love, not strategy. And in that moment, surrounded by men the world had called savages, Tobias Hartwell, rancher outsider, orphaned by silence, and hardened by son, felt smaller than he had ever felt in his life. He had almost killed this man. He had nearly let him bleed out beside a well built by his own hands because of fear, because of stories, because of what he thought he knew. Tobias blinked back shame. He couldn't meet the chief's eyes when the old man finally turned to face him. But then something unexpected happened. The chief approached Tobias slowly and placed both hands on his shoulders. His touch was firm, steady. Tobias expected reproach, a curse, a cold stare. Instead, the chief spoke, his voice deep and unwavering. Words in Apache solemn and powerful. Ayanna translated, though his voice shook. He says, "You are now brother to our people. That what you did today, offering water, showing mercy, risking your life for truth, these are the actions of a true warrior." Tobias's knees almost gave. He had done nothing special. He had given a dying man water. The same thing he would have done for a wounded dog. But here now, it was as if the whole world had shifted because of it. And maybe it had. One by one, the Apache warriors dismounted and walked toward him. They didn't speak. They didn't bow. They simply reached out and touched his hand. Not a handshake, not a greeting, an acknowledgement, a communion. When the last warrior passed, the chief stepped forward with a long, leather-wrapped bundle. He opened it slowly, revealing a war lance adorned with eagle feathers and intricate beadwork. Its shaft was worn smooth by generations. This, Ayanna said softly, belonged to my grandfather, and his grandfather before him. No white man has ever carried it. Until now. Tobias took it with shaking hands, feeling the weight of not just wood and steel, but legacy. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in blood and gold. A wind swept through the valley, and Tobias stood in the center of it all, not as a settler, not as a stranger, but as something new. Not Apache, not outsider, just a man who chose mercy, and in doing so had been changed forever. 24 hours later, they were gone. No trace left but hoofprints in the dirt, the faint scent of smoke, and the war lance still clutched in Tobias Hartwell's hands like it weighed more than iron. The Apache had ridden out just as they came, in perfect silence, in perfect formation, with a dignity Tobias still couldn't quite comprehend. They left behind no scars, only a legacy. Webb and Hawkins had been tied, disarmed, and led away by their own deputies to face charges that would end their reign of corruption. The gun-running ring they'd protected had been exposed with letters, ledgers, and the blood-stained confession of greed turned fatal. Colonel Morrison's name was cleared. The peace treaty Ayanna had risked everything for wasn't just renewed, it was expanded to include all tribes of the Southern Territories. It should have been a celebration. But Tobias couldn't bring himself to smile. He sat alone in the quiet yard, where only yesterday he had feared for his life, now wrestling with a strange hollow ache. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long, soft light over the land. Everything felt quieter than usual, like even the birds were holding their breath. The war lance rested across his knees, its beadwork glowing faintly in the morning light. Ancient patterns, eagle feathers, a shaft worn smooth by the hands of leaders, warriors, fathers. And now him. He looked down at it and felt an almost painful tension in his chest. He wasn't worthy of this. Not of their praise, not of their ceremony, certainly not of their sacred relic. He hadn't been brave, not really. He'd nearly let Ayanna die, and even when he helped him, it wasn't out of some heroic impulse. It was water, a reflex. He didn't know who Ayanna was, didn't understand what was at stake. He'd just seen a wounded man and given him a drink. And now they were calling him brother. He should have refused. He should have told Chief Takakoda when the old man placed his hands on Tobias's shoulders and spoke the sacred words of adoption that he didn't deserve the title, that he had done so little, that the ghosts of the things he hadn't done hadn't stopped, still haunted him. But the chief hadn't asked for explanations. He had simply looked Tobias in the eye like he was seeing through the skin through the shame and said something Tobias would never forget. It is not about where a man began. It is about what he chooses when the fire comes. Still, Tobias couldn't shake the feeling. Not even as the warriors approached one by one to touch his hand in acknowledgement. Not even as Ayanna handed him the lance with a quiet smile and said, "This is yours now. Not because you were born to us, but because you acted like one of us when it mattered." Tobias remembered looking away, then blinking hard. Something in his chest had shifted, cracked, like a stone that had sat too long in one place, finally rolling aside, letting light reach the soil beneath. And now in the hush of dawn, he found himself walking slowly toward the edge of the yard, toward a small rise overlooking the valley. The same rise where he'd once stood as a boy, listening to his father warn him about savage tribes and never trusting a red man. The same place he'd watched fires in the distance and imagined monsters, not families. He knelt in the dirt, the lance across his lap, and he whispered, almost ashamed of the sound of his own voice, "I'm sorry for what I was, for what I believed." A wind picked up, brushing the tall grass like a hand through hair. It felt cleansing. Behind him he heard quiet footsteps. He turned to see Ayanna, still weak, leaning on a carved walking stick, but alive and sharp-eyed. "You look like a man about to bury something," Ayanna said gently. Tobias nodded. "I thought maybe I should return it," he said, motioning to the lance. "I'm not sure I deserve to carry it." Ayanna stepped closer. "You don't." Tobias looked up, startled. Ayanna smiled faintly. "Neither did my grandfather, or his. They just tried to act in a way that made them worthy of it tomorrow, not yesterday." Silence passed between them. Heavy, gentle. "You saved more than my life," Ayanna said after a moment. "You saved the peace. You made men question the orders they've followed for years. You stood in the path of bullets. You faced fear and chose mercy. That lance isn't about being perfect. It's about remembering why you chose." Tobias didn't respond right away. He just gripped the lance tighter, and for the first time, felt like maybe, just maybe, he could carry its weight. Ayanna touched his shoulder, then turned to go. Just before he disappeared into the trees, he glanced back with a glint of humor. "Don't bury it, Tobias. You're going to need it again." The Apache had ridden out, just as they came, in perfect silence, in perfect formation, with a dignity Tobias still couldn't quite comprehend. They left behind no scars, only a legacy. Webb and Hawkins had been tied, disarmed,